What does true devotion look like when life shatters your world? And how do new beginnings bloom from the deepest sorrow? Step into the profound narrative of Ruth and Naomi's story. Their story is a powerful testament to unwavering loyalty and the extraordinary courage it takes to embrace a fresh start, offering deep reflections for us all. Every twist in their path leads to a breathtaking ending you will not want to miss. Stay with me until the very end, because this story holds a message that could change the way you see loyalty, courage, and grace forever. Hello, my beloved friend. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. Wherever in the world you are listening from, I would love to know. Are you resting in a quiet room lit only by the glow of a small lamp? Are you tucked in under soft blankets while the evening wind stirs the trees outside your window? Or perhaps you are somewhere warm, surrounded by silence, allowing your heart to settle and your body to rest. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. It warms my heart to read each message. If you enjoy gentle Bible stories like this one, I kindly invite you to like this video, subscribe to this peaceful channel, and share it with someone else who may be seeking calm. You are helping others find rest and helping us continue to bring stories of love and hope to the world. And also, if you'd like to listen to more calming Bible stories like this one, I've created a special playlist just for you. You'll find it in the description below. It's perfect for peaceful nights, relaxation, or quiet time with God. Tonight, we begin a quiet and beautiful journey. It is the story of Ruth and Naomi, a story told in the book of Ruth, tucked between the pages of Scripture, glowing like a candle in the dark. This is a tale of loyalty, of deep loss and quiet faith, of kindness that flows from one soul to another, and of love that comes not in the form of fireworks, but in the gentle unfolding of trust and mercy. As we begin, let your heart open. Let your mind slow. Let the rhythm of this story guide you into rest. Long ago, in the land of Israel, there was a small town called Bethlehem. In Hebrew, its name meant house of bread. It was a farming village, with stone homes and winding paths, surrounded by hills and fields. The people of Bethlehem lived simple lives, growing grain, raising animals, tending to their land and families. But there came a time when trouble fell upon the land. It was during the days when judges ruled Israel, before the time of kings. A great famine struck the region. The rains no longer came when they were needed. The earth grew dry and cracked. Crops failed. Families grew hungry. The house of bread had no bread to offer. In that time lived a man named Elimelech. He was from Bethlehem, from the tribe of Judah. He lived there with his wife Naomi, whose name meant pleasant, and with their 2 sons, Mahlon and Kilion. As the famine worsened and food became scarce, Elimelech faced a hard decision: to remain in the land and risk his family's survival, or to leave and search for food in a foreign land. He chose to leave. Elimelech gathered Naomi and the 2 boys, and they set out for the land of Moab, east of Israel, across the Jordan River and beyond the Dead Sea. Moab was a different place, with its own gods and customs. It was not Israel. But in Moab there was food. The journey would have taken them across rugged terrain, through valleys and along winding paths. They travelled with hope, with hunger, and perhaps with sorrow, leaving behind the land of their birth. When they arrived in Moab, they settled there. Life became stable again. The boys grew older, there was food on the table, and Naomi, far from her homeland, created a home in a foreign place. But the peace did not last. In time, Elimelech died. Naomi was left a widow in a strange land. She still had her sons, and they remained with her. As the years passed, Mahlon and Chilion took wives from among the women of Moab. One was named Orpah, the other was named Ruth. For a while, things were calm. The household was filled with new voices, laughter, stories, daily life. Naomi, though widowed, was surrounded by family. Her daughters-in-law became like her own daughters. But after 10 years, sorrow struck again. First one son died, then the other. Mahlon and Chilion were both gone. Naomi had now lost her husband and both her children. She stood alone in Moab, a foreign widow with no sons to protect or provide. Only Orpah and Ruth remained, 2 young widows bound to her by marriage and by love. They too had suffered, and the 3 women, different in age and origin, were joined by grief. Then Naomi heard a whisper of news from her homeland. The famine had ended. The Lord had visited his people and provided food once more in Judah. The house of bread had bread again. Naomi felt a pull in her heart, a longing for the land of her people. Though she had no husband and no sons, though she was older now and weary from sorrow, she rose and prepared to return to Bethlehem. Orpah and Ruth, devoted and kind, prepared to go with her. They began the journey together, 3 women walking along the road toward Judah. But not long into their journey, Naomi paused. She turned to the young women and said with gentle sorrow, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." She kissed them, and they wept together. The road was dusty. The sun may have been high above them, but the heaviness they carried was not from the weight of their steps. It was the ache of goodbye. Orpah and Ruth both protested. They did not want to leave her. They had grown to love her deeply. But Naomi insisted, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband." The grief in Naomi's voice was plain. She believed her future held nothing but sorrow. Orpah, through tears, kissed Naomi goodbye, and with love she turned back and returned to her family in Moab. But Ruth did not leave. She stayed where she stood. She looked into Naomi's eyes and spoke words that would echo through time. "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely if even death separates you and me." Naomi said no more. She saw the truth in Ruth's eyes. This young woman, from a different land, had chosen her. had chosen her people, had chosen her God. And so they continued on together. The journey may have been long. Perhaps they walked in silence. But they walked in unity. They walked in trust. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred. The women of the town looked and whispered, "Can this be Naomi?" So many years had passed. Naomi replied with sadness, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." She did not know that Ruth's presence beside her was not emptiness at all. It was the beginning of something deeply beautiful. They arrived in Bethlehem just as the barley harvest was beginning. And so the story begins. The barley harvest had just begun in Bethlehem. The fields outside the town swayed with tall golden stalks ready to be gathered. The sun was gentle in the sky, and the scent of warm earth and ripe grain filled the air. After so many years away, Naomi and Ruth had returned to the land of Naomi's birth. But they had returned with very little. They had no money, no home of their own, no servants or fields. They were two widows trying to begin again. But Naomi still knew the customs of her people. In Israel it was commanded in the law that the poor, the foreigners, the widows, and the orphans be allowed to gather leftover grain from the fields during harvest. The workers would reap the main stalks, but whatever was dropped or left along the edges was to be left for those in need. It was a quiet and merciful way to care for the vulnerable. Naomi remembered this law, and Ruth was willing to go. One morning, Ruth spoke softly to her mother-in-law. "Let me go to the fields," she said, "and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi nodded. "Go ahead, my daughter." So Ruth rose early. She covered her head with a cloth to shield her from the sun and walked through the dusty streets of Bethlehem until she reached the open countryside beyond. There she saw men and women moving among the stalks. Reapers with sickles cut the barley, others gathered it into bundles, and along the edges the poor came with baskets or shawls to gather what remained. Ruth entered one of the fields. She did not know who it belonged to. She only saw that it was filled with grain, and so she humbly stepped behind the harvesters and began to glean. She bent low. She picked up pieces of barley that had fallen. She worked quietly. Her fingers moved steadily. Her eyes scanned the ground. She was strong, but she was alone. What Ruth did not know was that the field she had chosen belonged to a man named Boaz. Boaz was a relative of Naomi's late husband Elimelech. He was a man of standing and honor. He owned land, employed workers, and followed the ways of the Lord. That morning, Boaz arrived to visit his fields and greet his workers. "The Lord be with you," he called out to the harvesters. "The Lord bless you," they replied. Boaz walked among the stalks and watched his workers. Then he noticed someone he did not recognize. A woman among the gleaners. She moved with care and dignity. She was not like the others from the town. Boaz turned to the overseer of his workers. "Who does that young woman belong to?" he asked. The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She came into the field this morning and has been working steadily from morning until now, except for a short rest in the shelter." Boaz listened. Then he walked toward Ruth. She looked up and saw a man approaching. She did not know who he was, but he spoke kindly to her. "My daughter, listen to me. Do not go and glean in another field. Do not go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Ruth was surprised by his kindness. She bowed low, her face to the ground, and asked, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz looked at her with great respect. He said, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth listened, and her heart was comforted. She said gently, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." When it was time for the midday meal, Boaz invited her to come and eat with the harvesters. She sat among them. Boaz offered her roasted grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she even had some left over. Then she rose again to return to the field and continue gleaning. Boaz gave quiet instructions to his men. "Let her gather among the sheaves and do not reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. Do not rebuke her." Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered and found that she had collected about an ephah. That was a large amount for one day. She lifted the grain and carried it back to the town. When she reached home, Naomi saw all that she had gathered. Ruth also brought out the leftover food from her meal and gave it to Naomi. Her mother-in-law looked at the barley and asked, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her about the man she had worked with that day. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. Naomi's eyes brightened. Her heart lifted. She said, "The Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Ruth continued, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him. In someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women who worked for Boaz. She gleaned until the barley harvest was finished, and then the wheat harvest began. Through it all she remained with Naomi, caring for her, loving her, and walking gently through each day. What Ruth did not yet know was that her simple kindness, her hard work, and her quiet loyalty had not only touched Naomi's heart, but had begun to soften the heart of Boaz as well. But for now, the fields continued to wave in the sun, and Ruth's hands stayed busy with harvest. And the story of love and redemption moved gently forward step by step, like the turning of seasons. The days in Bethlehem had grown shorter. The harvest was nearly finished. The barley fields had been gathered, and the wheat had been brought in. The sun no longer rose quite so early, and the evenings came with a gentler hush. Ruth had worked faithfully through it all. From morning until night, she had walked behind the reapers. Her hands had gathered grain with care. Her arms had carried bundles back home. Each day she returned to Naomi with food and kindness, and each day Naomi watched her with quiet gratitude. They were no longer hungry. The Lord had provided. But Naomi, wise in age and gentle in thought, began to feel a stirring in her heart. She loved Ruth dearly, and though their life together was filled with peace and mutual care, Naomi wanted more for her. She wanted Ruth to have a future with shelter and joy. She wanted her daughter-in-law to find rest. And in those days, rest for a young widow often meant the comfort and protection of a home through marriage. One evening, as the soft shadows filled their room and the grain lay stored for the winter, Naomi spoke gently to Ruth. "My daughter," she said, "should I not try to find a home for you, where you will be well provided for?" Ruth looked at her, listening. Naomi continued, "You have worked in the fields of Boaz, and Boaz is a relative of ours, one of our guardian redeemers. In the tradition of Israel, a guardian redeemer was a man from the family line who could take responsibility for the care and restoration of a widow or a family member in need. It was a sacred duty, one born from the heart of God's law, meant to protect those who were most vulnerable. Naomi had been watching. She had seen the way Boaz had treated Ruth, with honor, with kindness, with generosity and grace. And she had begun to wonder if perhaps the Lord was weaving something greater than they could see. Naomi leaned closer and said, "Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." The threshing floor was a flat, open space outside the village where harvested grain was separated from its husks. After the harvest, the men would gather there in the evening, toss the grain into the air, and allow the wind to carry away the chaff. Then they would rest there for the night, guarding the grain until morning. Naomi gave Ruth a plan. "Wash, put on perfume, and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but do not let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." These words were not ones of boldness or seduction. They were words shaped by custom. This was the ancient way of asking for redemption, of making a respectful request for protection. Ruth was not forcing her way forward. She was humbly offering her heart and future to a man who had already shown deep honor and grace. Ruth, ever loyal, nodded softly. "I will do whatever you say," she replied. So Ruth prepared. She bathed. She wrapped herself in her cloak. She waited until night had fallen, and then she walked quietly through the streets of Bethlehem, out toward the fields where the grain had been gathered and the men were working under the stars. The threshing floor was busy at first. There were torches and voices, the sound of grain being tossed into the air, the rustle of cloth and the low talk of men finishing their work. Ruth stood back, unseen, and waited. In time, Boaz finished eating and drinking. His heart was content. He found a place at the far end of the threshing floor, laid down, and fell asleep with a cloak covering him. Around him the wind settled. The air grew still. Ruth approached in silence. She walked carefully, not wanting to disturb the others. When she reached Boaz, she knelt beside him and gently uncovered his feet. Then she lay down. The night passed slowly. The stars watched overhead. The grain lay piled nearby. Ruth remained still. In the middle of the night, Boaz stirred. Something woke him. Perhaps it was the coolness of his feet. He turned and saw a woman lying there. He was startled. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "I am your servant Ruth," she replied. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." These words were full of meaning. In Israel, to spread the corner of a garment over someone was a way of saying, "I will protect you. I will make you part of my household." Ruth was asking Boaz, with humility and trust, to take that sacred role. Boaz looked at her with kindness. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he said. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." He paused. "Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning I will speak with him. If he is willing to redeem you, good. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it." He told her to stay where she was until morning. So Ruth lay at his feet until dawn, and she rose before anyone could be recognized. Boaz, wanting to protect her honor, said, "Let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." Then he gave her 6 measures of barley and placed them in her shawl. He helped her to lift the bundle and sent her back into the town before the sun had fully risen. When Ruth arrived home, Naomi was waiting. "How did it go, my daughter?" she asked. Ruth told her everything Boaz had said and gave her the barley he had sent. Naomi listened and smiled softly, her eyes filled with peace. "Wait, my daughter," she said, "until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." And with that, the 2 women waited, quietly, hopefully, trusting that the Lord, who had brought them safely through grief and famine, was now weaving something new and good for their future. Morning came quietly over the hills of Bethlehem. The fields were calm. The harvest was finished. The threshing floor was still. The town was beginning to stir as the people rose from sleep. Somewhere within the village, Ruth had returned to Naomi's home, carrying the gift of barley Boaz had given her. She spoke softly with her mother-in-law, and together they waited in silence, trusting in the character of the man who had spoken with such kindness the night before. Boaz, meanwhile, had already risen with the first light of day. He was a man of his word, and he had made a promise. Ruth had asked him to redeem her, to become her guardian and husband. Boaz desired to fulfill that request, but there was something that had to be done first. In their tradition, there was an order to redemption. There was another man who was more closely related to Elimelech's family than Boaz himself. This man had the first right to redeem the land of Naomi's late husband and the name of their family. Boaz knew that everything must be done properly and with honor. So he walked through the stone streets of Bethlehem and made his way to the town gate. In ancient Israel, the gate of a town was more than an entrance. It was a place of judgment and agreement. There, elders would gather, witnesses would sit in the shade, business was conducted, matters were settled in the presence of the community. And it was here that Boaz took his place and waited. Soon, the guardian redeemer of whom he had spoken passed by. Boaz called out to him kindly, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." The man turned and sat beside Boaz. Then Boaz gathered 10 of the elders of the town and asked them to sit as well. He wanted everything to be done in the open, before witnesses, with truth and peace. Once they were gathered, Boaz began to speak. "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech," he said. "I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." The man listened and replied, "I will redeem it." But Boaz continued, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the man hesitated. He looked at Boaz and then at the elders, and he said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." In the days of Israel, it was the custom that when one party transferred the right of redemption to another, they would remove their sandal and hand it to the other person. This was a public sign, a quiet and clear gesture, showing that the responsibility had passed. So the man removed his sandal and gave it to Boaz, saying, "Buy it yourself." Boaz held the sandal. The elders and others sitting nearby watched. Boaz stood and spoke with a voice of peace and certainty. "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife. In doing this, I am preserving the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. You are witnesses this day." The elders nodded, and the people who had gathered offered their blessing. The air around them filled with quiet joy. "We are witnesses," they said. "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Their words were rich with meaning. They spoke not only of marriage but of blessing, of future generations, of honor and memory. The people of Bethlehem had seen Ruth glean in the fields. They had watched her care for Naomi. Now they welcomed her fully, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Boaz returned home. He told Ruth what had happened. he told Naomi as well. The waiting was over. The redemption was complete. What had begun in famine and sorrow now unfolded in blessing. Ruth would become Boaz's wife. Naomi, who once called herself bitter, now saw hope rising gently like morning light over the hills. Her family's name would not be lost. Her daughter-in-law, who had walked with her through every shadow, would now step into joy. And Boaz, a man of faith and kindness, would honor the legacy of those who had passed. There was no parade, no great announcement with trumpets, only the quiet certainty of a promise kept. A field once filled with leftover grain had become a field of hope. A foreign woman once gathering scraps was now part of a sacred family line. And so the town of Bethlehem held its breath, just for a moment, as the winds shifted gently. What once was empty had become full. What once was grief had become joy. And all of it was done with care, with patience, and with deep and holy love. The days after the meeting at the town gate passed in calmness and preparation. Boaz, now free to take Ruth as his wife, honored the covenant they had entered into. There were no loud celebrations, no trumpet blasts, just quiet joy, a simple wedding among the olive trees, a joining of hands and hearts, a promise spoken not only before the people, but before God himself. Ruth, the Moabite woman who had once gleaned at the edges of the field, was now welcomed into the heart of the family. She was no longer a stranger. She was no longer an outsider. She was a wife, a beloved, a woman chosen not only by Boaz, but by the Lord who had written her story with tender care. Boaz and Ruth began their life together in Bethlehem. The town, small and full of memory, now held new beginnings. Ruth moved through the home with quiet grace. Boaz rose each day with steadiness and faith. Their home was one of warmth and kindness, not lavish in wealth, but rich in spirit. And soon the Lord showed them even more favor. In time, Ruth conceived and gave birth to a son, a child born not of sorrow, but of redemption, a child born not of famine, but of fullness, a child born from the joining of two hearts who had each known loss, and who now shared in great joy. The news spread through the town with gentle excitement. The women of Bethlehem came to Naomi. Their voices were filled with blessing not only for Ruth but for Naomi herself. They had watched her return from Moab with her head bowed low. They had heard her say, "Call me bitter." But now they came to her with new words. "Praise be to the Lord," they said, "who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Naomi listened. She held the words in her heart like a precious stone. And then she held the child. Her arms, once empty, were now full. Her heart, once heavy, now lifted with joy. She took the baby in her arms and cared for him as if he were her own. Her hands that had carried sorrow now carried new life. Her eyes that had seen famine and death now looked into the eyes of promise. The women of the neighborhood gave the boy his name. They called him Obed, which means servant or worshipper. a humble name, a holy name. For this child would grow to serve not only his family, but the greater purpose of God. Obed would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, and David would one day become king. From the womb of Ruth, from the sorrow of Naomi, from the field of Boaz, from the threshing floor and the harvest season, would come a line of kings, a line that would one day lead to the Messiah himself. But in this moment, none of that was known. None of it was spoken. There was only a grandmother cradling her grandson, whispering prayers of gratitude. There was only the soft sound of a baby breathing against her shoulder. And though Ruth and Boaz surely rejoiced, this part of the story now lingered with Naomi, the one who had lost everything, the one who had returned with only Ruth beside her, the one who had changed her name in grief, and who now found it changed again in quiet gladness. The home that had once echoed with silence was now filled with the gentle rhythms of new life, the cooing of a child, the laughter of Ruth, the quiet voice of Boaz reading scripture in the evening light. The Lord had not forgotten them. He had seen them. He had gathered their broken pieces and formed something whole. Naomi's story did not end in bitterness. It ended in blessing. And so we pause, not with loud praise, but with reverent wonder. This story, tucked gently into the pages of the Old Testament, is one of the most beautiful portraits of God's quiet providence. It is a story of everyday people, a mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law, a farmer and a widow, fields and harvests, law and kindness, loss and love. There were no battles fought, no kingdoms torn down, no angels appearing in fire, and yet the glory of the Lord shines here, in the soil, in the footsteps, in the faithful acts of care, in the simple courage of a woman who would not leave her mother-in-law's side, in the patient kindness of a man who honored the law and the heart. Through this story, we are reminded that God works in ordinary places, in small towns, in small homes, in small acts of love. He redeems what was lost. He restores what was broken. He turns bitterness into sweetness, emptiness into fullness, famine into harvest. And from Ruth, the Moabite woman who chose faith over familiarity, came a family that would carry the light of the world. But for now, there is only stillness, a baby resting, a grandmother smiling, a family gathered around the fire, and Bethlehem sleeps. In the quiet town of Bethlehem, far from palaces and thrones, the first cries of a newborn had brought joy to the heart of a once bitter widow. Naomi, whose soul had been marked by loss and wandering, now rocked her grandson in her arms. Ruth, who had once said she would never leave Naomi's side, now stood beside her as both daughter and mother. And Boaz, a man of faith and honor, had fulfilled his promise and become both husband and father. The child was named Obed. His name meant servant. His name meant worshipper. It was not a name chosen for glory. It was chosen for humility and praise, a name that reflected the quiet reverence that had filled this entire story from the beginning. As the boy grew, the women of Bethlehem continued to speak blessings over the family. The love and loyalty Ruth had shown did not go unnoticed. Her kindness had become her legacy, and through that kindness, something extraordinary had begun. Obed grew strong. His feet ran through the hills of Bethlehem. His hands helped his father in the fields. His laughter filled the home that once had only silence. Naomi grew older, but her days were no longer marked by sorrow. She watched Obed learn, laugh, and grow. She saw in him the promise of tomorrow, the gift of God's mercy. Years passed. Obed became a father. He had a son and named him Jesse. The name Jesse meant gift. And Jesse too would grow up in Bethlehem, surrounded by the rhythms of planting and harvesting, of prayer and praise. He would raise his own sons, and among them would be a boy unlike any other, a shepherd, a singer, a warrior, a king. That boy would be David, the one who would stand before Goliath with only a sling and a stone, the one who would write songs in the wilderness and pour out his heart in psalms, the one who would lead Israel with courage and compassion, the one whom God would call a man after his own heart. And all of this began with Ruth, a woman from Moab, a woman who had no title, no wealth, no protection, a woman who clung to her mother-in-law and said, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." She did not know that by walking into Bethlehem with Naomi, she was stepping into the story of kings. She did not know that by gleaning in the fields, she was being led toward a redeemer. She did not know that by becoming the wife of Boaz and the mother of Obed, she was becoming the great-grandmother of a king. And more than that, she was stepping into the long and sacred lineage that would one day lead to the birth of the Savior. For the line of Ruth did not end with David. Generations later, through that same family line, another child would be born in Bethlehem, a child wrapped in cloth and laid in a manger, a child who would be called Emmanuel, God with us, Jesus, the Messiah. And so, tucked quietly into the pages of Scripture, the story of Ruth is more than a tale of love and loyalty. It is the beginning of a royal line, a holy thread that ties the days of the judges to the days of the kings, and the days of the kings to the coming of Christ. But for Ruth, there was no pride, no desire for honor or legacy. She lived her life with humility, with faithfulness, with love. She left her homeland and chose a life of uncertainty to care for her mother-in-law. She worked tirelessly in the fields, not knowing where each step would lead. She approached Boaz with dignity and trust, asking only for mercy. And the Lord saw her. The Lord honored her. And through her, he wrote one of the most beautiful chapters in the story of redemption. Boaz, too, played his part with quiet strength. He did not act out of obligation, but out of kindness. He listened, he protected, he redeemed. He obeyed the ways of God not only in word, but in deed, and for that he became a part of something eternal. And Naomi, whose story began in famine and loss, found restoration in the most unexpected way. Through Ruth, through the gift of Obed, through the steady unfolding of God's mercy. Her bitterness was turned to joy. Her sorrow was turned to laughter. Her emptiness was turned to fullness. She once returned to Bethlehem with only a Moabite daughter-in-law by her side. Now, she had a family again, a home, a future, a legacy. As we sit with this part of the story, we are invited to reflect on the beauty of God's gentle work. He does not always move in thunder and fire. Sometimes he moves in harvest fields, in late-night whispers, in sandal exchanges at a town gate, in the smile of a baby in the arms of an aging woman. The story of Ruth is a reminder that no one is forgotten. No one is too far away. No sorrow is too deep. No season of famine lasts forever. For the Lord is always planting seeds beneath the soil. Seeds of healing, seeds of hope, seeds of restoration. And when the time is right, those seeds begin to grow. Sometimes they grow into laughter, sometimes into love, and sometimes into a king. But always they grow into something good. Always. The fields of Bethlehem are quiet now. The harvest is over. The grain has been gathered. The baskets have been stored. And the wind, which once passed through rows of barley and wheat, now rustles gently through the olive trees. In the distance, the sound of a child's laughter drifts through the air. Obed, the son of Ruth and Boaz, is growing, and Naomi, once emptied by sorrow, now holds joy in her arms. We take a moment now to step back and walk slowly through this story once more, not to rush, not to reach the end, but to rest in the beauty of what has unfolded. We remember Ruth in Moab, standing beside Naomi on a dusty road. Her husband was gone, her heart was broken. She could have stayed in her homeland. She could have chosen comfort and familiarity. But she chose something else. She chose love. She looked at Naomi, the mother-in-law who had become like a mother to her, and she said words that have echoed through time. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. They were not grand words spoken before a crowd. They were quiet words, full of promise. Words spoken from one grieving heart to another. Words that held a steady kind of love. The kind that does not walk away. The kind that stays. And so Ruth went with Naomi to Bethlehem. They had no certainty, no plan, only trust, only hope. They arrived in Bethlehem at the start of the barley harvest. There was work to be done, and Ruth offered to go into the fields to gather grain. She did not seek recognition. She did not seek praise. She only wanted to care for Naomi, to provide for them both. And so she bent low among the stalks. She gleaned, she gathered, and she caught the eye of Boaz. Boaz was a man of kindness and character. When he saw Ruth in the field, he did not turn her away. He did not ignore her or send her to another place. He spoke gently. He protected her. He invited her to eat. He honored the quiet strength he saw in her. Boaz had heard the story of Ruth's devotion to Naomi. He knew she had left her homeland and walked into the unknown. He blessed her for her courage, and he made sure she would not go hungry. Each day, Ruth returned home with grain. Naomi watched her and wondered at the grace of God. She knew the man whose field Ruth had chosen. Boaz was part of their family line, a guardian redeemer. And so Naomi, seeing the gentle hand of providence at work, gave Ruth a plan shaped not by ambition, but by tradition, a way to ask for protection, for covering, for redemption. Ruth listened. She obeyed. She went to the threshing floor. She waited in the shadows until Boaz lay down to sleep. Then she uncovered his feet and lay there. When he awoke, she said softly, "Spread your garment over me, for you are a guardian redeemer." It was not a demand. It was not a plea of desperation. It was an invitation, a request for shelter and love, a sign of trust. Boaz responded with blessing. He praised Ruth's kindness. He promised to do what was right, and he kept his word. At the town gate, before the elders, Boaz made the matter known. He claimed his place as Ruth's redeemer. He honored the family of Elimelech. He restored the name of the dead, and he brought Ruth fully into his home and heart. Their marriage was a quiet joy, and in time the Lord gave them a son. They named him Obed. The women of the town rejoiced with Naomi. "Blessed be the Lord," they said, "who has not left you without a redeemer. May his name be famous in Israel." Naomi held the child close. The one who had lost a husband and 2 sons now held new life in her arms. The one who once said, "Call me bitter," now smiled with peace. Through Ruth's faithfulness came redemption. Through Boaz's kindness came restoration. And through Naomi's sorrow came hope. This story, so gentle and beautiful, holds lessons that soothe the soul. It teaches us that loyalty is not small, that faith is not wasted, that even in loss, love can grow, that even in silence, God is working. Ruth's story is not one of loud miracles. It is not filled with armies or fire or thunder. It is filled with footsteps in fields, with hands gathering grain, with whispered blessings and quiet acts of love. And yet, through this story, the line of David was born. Through this story, the path to the Messiah was laid. From a foreign widow and a faithful man came the greatest promise the world would ever know. And we are invited into this story, not as spectators, but as those who walk in the same spirit, those who choose love over fear, those who walk into the unknown with trust, those who remain when it would be easier to leave. So if your heart is tired, if you carry sorrow, if you are walking through a season of uncertainty, let this story settle over you like a warm blanket. Let Ruth remind you that small acts of love change everything. Let Naomi remind you that no sorrow is beyond God's reach. Let Boaz remind you that kindness is strength. And let Obed, the child of harvest and hope, remind you that God's story is always unfolding, even when we cannot yet see the end. Boaz was not the first name spoken in the story of Ruth. He did not appear when Naomi left for Moab. He was not present in the long years of famine. His voice was not heard when Ruth made her vow. But when the time was right, and the fields were ripe with harvest, Boaz stepped quietly into the story. He came into view not with loud words, but with steady kindness, not with force, but with gentleness. And yet, the presence of Boaz changed everything. He was a landowner, a man of standing in Bethlehem. His fields were wide and full. His workers respected him. His home was built not only with stone and wood, but with honor and truth. He was a man rooted in the law of the Lord. But more than that, he lived it with grace. When Boaz first saw Ruth gleaning in his field, he could have turned away. She was a foreigner, a Moabite, a woman working in the margins of society. He had no obligation to notice her, much less to welcome her. But Boaz asked about her. He listened carefully as his workers explained who she was, the young woman who had returned from Moab with Naomi, the one who had left her own people and land to care for her aging mother-in-law. Boaz saw her not through the eyes of society, but through the eyes of compassion. He went to her. He spoke gently. "My daughter," he said, calling her not stranger, not outsider, but daughter. He told her to stay in his fields, to follow close behind the workers, to drink from the jars of water he had provided. He had already instructed the young men not to touch her. He made sure she was safe. Ruth was surprised by his warmth. "Why have I found favor in your eyes?" she asked. "You have noticed me, a foreigner." Boaz answered not with pride, but with blessing. "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband," he said. "How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." This was the heart of Boaz. He saw the good in others. He honored it. He encouraged it. He did not look down on Ruth because of where she came from. He lifted her up because of her heart. Later, when Ruth sat beside the workers for a meal, Boaz offered her bread. He passed her roasted grain. He invited her to share the same food as those who worked in his fields. It was not a small gesture. It was a sign of welcome, a sign of respect. After the meal, Boaz gave quiet instructions to his workers. He told them to let Ruth gather among the sheaves, to leave extra stalks behind for her, to let her glean freely and fully. He was generous, but he was not loud about it. He was just, but he did not seek recognition. Boaz was a man of calm leadership. His strength came not from controlling others, but from blessing them, from creating space for them to flourish. And when Ruth came to him on the threshing floor, uncovering his feet and asking him to redeem her, Boaz did not take advantage of her vulnerability. He honored her request. He saw her courage, and he responded with clarity and care. "The Lord bless you," he said again. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed before." He called her noble. He promised to act quickly and rightly. He remembered the law, and he fulfilled it not out of duty, but out of love. The next day he went to the town gate. He spoke to the closer relative. He did not hide the truth. He did not manipulate the outcome. He was honest. He was transparent. And when the other man declined to redeem Ruth, Boaz stepped forward. He did so in the presence of witnesses. He made his intentions known. He declared his desire to redeem the land and to marry Ruth, not in secret, but with open hands. And the people blessed him, not because he was powerful, but because he was good. This was Boaz, a man of God. a man of peace, a man who used his position not to protect himself, but to provide for others. He was a man of deep humility, who saw the beauty in a woman who had known loss, a man of quiet courage, who did what was right without needing praise, a man of wisdom, who knew when to speak and when to listen. And through him, the story of Ruth blossomed into something beautiful. His actions echoed beyond the field and the gate. They echoed into the life of Obed, into the life of Jesse, into the life of David, and into the life of Christ. Boaz, like Ruth, played his part in the great unfolding of God's plan. He did not seek a throne. He did not ask for glory. He simply lived with faith, and that was enough. For God sees what is done in quiet. He honors what is born of love, and he builds his kingdom not on pride, but on peace. So if you ever feel that your kindness goes unnoticed, or your patience is unseen, or your integrity is quiet in a noisy world, remember Boaz. Remember his calm strength, and rest, knowing that gentle faithfulness is never forgotten. Naomi's story begins long before the fields of Bethlehem were full again. It begins in a time of emptiness, a time of famine, a time when food had disappeared from the land and people were leaving their homes in search of survival. Naomi, her husband, Elimelech, and their 2 sons left Bethlehem during those hard days. They traveled to Moab, a land that was not their own, a land that carried memories of long ago tensions, but it was also a land of promise for those who were hungry and uncertain. In Moab they found shelter. Naomi's sons married Moabite women. Ruth and Orpah became part of her family. For a time, it seemed they might build something new in this unfamiliar place. But then the shadows deepened. One by one, Naomi's greatest joys were taken from her. First, Elimelech died. Her husband, the one she had journeyed beside for so many years, was gone. And then, both her sons died too. The grief was layered and heavy. Her home was quiet. Her arms were empty. Her heart was shattered. She had come to Moab with a husband and sons. Now she was left with only the memories. She heard that the Lord had once again provided for his people in Bethlehem, that the famine had passed, that the land was bearing fruit, and so she made the decision to return home, not because she was hopeful, not because she felt strong, but because there was nothing left to hold her where she was. As she began the journey back, both Ruth and Orpah walked with her. Naomi, thinking only of their future and not her own, urged them to return to their families. She was too old, she said, to give them new husbands or security. She believed she had nothing more to offer. She felt spent and broken. Orpah kissed her and turned back, but Ruth stayed. Ruth clung to her, and in that sacred moment, Naomi was no longer alone. She continued the journey home with Ruth by her side. When they reached Bethlehem, the women of the town stirred. "Can this be Naomi?" they asked, their voices full of surprise and sorrow. But Naomi answered with words that revealed her pain. "Do not call me Naomi," she said, which means pleasant. "Call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." These words were honest. They were not rebellious. They were not faithless. They were the words of a woman who had lost more than she could bear. But even in her grief, Naomi had not truly been left empty. Though she could not see it yet, Ruth was beside her. Ruth, whose devotion would become the vessel of Naomi's restoration. Naomi, in her sorrow, still guided Ruth with wisdom. She told her how to glean. She saw the kindness of Boaz and knew that something sacred was unfolding. She gave counsel with care. She spoke hope quietly, even when she herself still felt the ache of loss. And then, as Boaz fulfilled his promise and Ruth became his wife, Naomi's story began to turn. When Ruth bore a son, Naomi was not only a bystander, she was part of the miracle. The women of Bethlehem brought the child to her. They said, "Naomi has a son." They blessed her. They spoke of Ruth, saying she was more valuable than 7 sons. Naomi held Obed in her arms. The child's warmth against her skin reminded her of the goodness that still remained. Her bitterness began to melt away. She had been brought home, not only to Bethlehem, but to joy, not only to food, but to family, not only to safety, but to blessing. The Lord had never truly left her. Through Ruth, he had shown his steadfast love. Through Boaz, he had shown his redeeming power. Through Obed, he had shown that life could still bloom. Naomi's story is one of the most tender in all of Scripture. It does not move with speed. It moves with quiet steps. It is a story of grief that is honored, a story of love that heals, a story of faith that is patient, and a story of restoration that is complete. We often rush past pain, hoping it will end quickly. But Naomi teaches us that it is okay to feel sorrow. It is okay to speak it out loud. It is okay to walk slowly, to sit in silence, to wait. And yet, even when we cannot see it, God is still moving. He is still writing the story. He is still sending the Ruths of this world to walk beside us. He is still preparing the fields for harvest. He is still at work in the smallest moments. Naomi was not left empty. She was made full in a way she never expected. She thought her story had ended in loss, but it had only just begun. So if you, dear listener, are carrying sorrow tonight, if you feel like your story has been broken, let Naomi's journey comfort you. Know that God sees you. He has not forgotten you. He walks beside you even in silence. And in His time, He brings fullness. He brings healing. He brings home. Ruth's name has become one of love and devotion, of loyalty and strength. But before her name was cherished in the hearts of God's people, it was whispered with caution. Ruth was a Moabite. She was not born among the children of Israel. Her people did not share the history of the Red Sea or the desert wanderings. Her ancestors had not stood at Mount Sinai to receive the law. She came from a land with a different story. The Moabites were descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew. Their nation had often been in tension with Israel. They worshipped different gods. They followed different customs. And because of past enmity, the people of Israel were often warned to keep their distance from Moab. Yet Ruth, born into that land, did something unexpected. She turned away from her own gods. She turned away from her homeland, and she chose the God of Israel. She chose him not because of a miracle she had seen, or a vision in the night, but because she had watched Naomi. She had listened to Naomi's stories. She had walked beside her mother-in-law through grief, and in the quiet sorrow of their shared loss, Ruth found something greater than her own past. She found a new path, a new hope, a new home. When Naomi urged Ruth to stay in Moab, to return to her family and her people, Ruth spoke words that would forever define her heart. "Do not urge me to leave you," she said, "or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." It was a declaration of belonging, a vow not only to Naomi, but to the God who had once led his people through the wilderness. Ruth chose him with her feet. She chose him with her heart. She chose him with her life. And in that choice, the story began to change. Ruth became part of something far greater than she could have imagined. Her journey to Bethlehem was not just a journey across land. It was a journey across centuries of separation, a journey into covenant, a journey into redemption. In Bethlehem, she was seen first as a foreigner. The people called her the Moabite who returned with Naomi. It was not said with cruelty, but it carried a quiet boundary. She was other. She was new. She was not one of them. But Ruth did not let that stop her. She went into the fields. She worked with humility. She cared for Naomi with tenderness. She showed honor, grace, and courage in every action. And soon, what had defined her in the eyes of others began to fade. She was no longer just the Moabite. She was Ruth, the one who loved Naomi, the one who labored from morning to night, the one whose heart was full of quiet strength. Boaz saw her and spoke blessings over her life. The people began to speak of her with honor, and when she bore a child, they said that Naomi had been blessed through Ruth, a woman more valuable than 7 sons. God, in his deep kindness, did not reject Ruth because of where she came from. He welcomed her. He lifted her up. He wrote her into the very lineage of the Messiah, not because she was perfect, not because she had power, but because she was faithful, because she loved deeply, because she chose him. There are times when we may feel like outsiders too, when we feel we do not belong, when we carry names or pasts or stories that feel separate or small. But Ruth's life reminds us that God sees beyond borders and history. He looks at the heart. He receives those who seek him with honesty. He welcomes those who come in faith, even when they are uncertain, even when they feel unworthy. Ruth did not come to Bethlehem to be great. She came to be near to the one she loved. She came to do what was right. And because of her courage, her name is remembered with honor. Her story is read with reverence. Her legacy lives on through Obed, through Jesse, through David, and through Christ. God used Ruth not despite her being a Moabite, but in full knowledge of who she was. He showed that his mercy stretches far, that his arms are wide enough to gather people from every nation, that his grace is not bound by bloodlines, but opened by love. And so Ruth, the Moabite widow, became a mother in Israel, a woman of valor, a woman of deep faith, a woman whose story still speaks. It speaks to those who feel far away, to those who wonder if they can ever be part of something holy, to those who think their past defines their future. Ruth's life answers gently, yes, you are welcome, you are seen, you are loved, for God takes outsiders and brings them in. He takes sorrow and makes it sing. He takes loyalty and turns it into legacy. And in the fields of Bethlehem, he planted a seed through Ruth that would grow into the hope of the world. The house was quiet in the early morning light. The air smelled of bread and fresh grain. Outside, the sun slowly rose over the hills of Bethlehem, touching the rooftops and olive trees with gold. Inside, in a room where laughter had returned, a baby stirred softly in his mother's arms. His name was Obed. There were no trumpets to welcome him, no royal scrolls to announce his birth, no grand procession passed through the gates. Yet his birth was like a sunrise after a long night, quiet, gentle, full of hope. Ruth held him close, his warm cheek resting near her heart. She looked at his tiny hands, so new to the world, hands that would one day help carry the harvest, hands that would learn to guide animals and carry water and build shelter. But now they only curled and reached in soft wonder. Boaz stood nearby, watching them both. His face was peaceful, his heart was full. He had waited many years to find such joy. His life had been spent in steady work and quiet obedience. But now, in his arms, was the beginning of something new. And Naomi, who had once believed her days of joy were over, now smiled as she held her grandson. The women of Bethlehem gathered around her, rejoicing with her. They did not speak of Ruth's loss or Naomi's sorrow. They spoke of blessing. They said, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." These were not just kind words. They were blessings rooted in truth. Ruth, once a foreign widow, had brought light into Naomi's life. Boaz, once a quiet landowner, had become a vessel of restoration. And Obed, their son, would carry forward a promise that would stretch across generations. Naomi took the child into her arms. She held him as if he were a treasure. She became his nurse, watching over him with care. Her eyes, once dimmed by grief, now sparkled again. Her arms, once empty, were full once more. The town that had once asked, "Can this be Naomi?" now knew the answer. Yes, this was Naomi, but not the bitter woman who had returned from Moab. This was Naomi renewed, Naomi restored, Naomi rejoicing. Obed grew in that home, surrounded by love. He learned the rhythms of planting and harvesting. He heard stories of journey and faith. He saw his mother's kindness and his father's integrity. He learned from Naomi's wisdom and gentleness. His name, Obed, meant servant or worshipper. It was a name of humility, a name of purpose. And though he did not yet know it, his life would prepare the way for something far greater than a good harvest or a strong household. He would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, and David would become king, the great king of Israel, the shepherd boy who sang to the Lord, the warrior who trusted in God's power, the man after God's own heart. And from David's line, many generations later, would come the promised Messiah, Jesus, the Son of God, the one who would redeem the world, the one born, like Obed, in Bethlehem, the one who would carry in his hands the healing of all nations. But in this moment, none of that was yet known. There were no signs of royalty in the quiet home of Boaz and Ruth. Only peace, only love, only the simple joy of a family restored. And that is what makes the story of Obed so beautiful. He was not born to fame. He was not born with power. He was born to a woman who had chosen love over fear, to a man who had chosen kindness over comfort, to a grandmother who had once believed her joy had ended. And in their home, he was cradled with care. Obed teaches us that God's promises are often born in silence, in homes that are not grand, in hearts that are not proud, in people who are faithful in the quiet things. His story reminds us that every life has meaning, that every child carries the possibility of beauty, that every home, no matter how simple, can become a part of something eternal. When Ruth gave birth to Obed, she did more than give Naomi a grandson. She gave the world a line of hope, a line that would lead to David, a line that would lead to Jesus. But she did not know that yet. All she knew was the joy of holding her son, the wonder of hearing his first cry, the peace of seeing Naomi smile again. That was enough. That was everything. And so, the blessing of Obed was not just that he would become the grandfather of a king. The blessing of Obed was that he brought healing to a hurting home, that he brought joy to a sorrowful heart, that he was born of love, wrapped in kindness, and welcomed with praise. And that in itself was a miracle in the quiet town of Bethlehem, a miracle in the arms of Ruth and Naomi, a miracle in the unfolding story of redemption. So if you ever wonder whether your life matters, or if your quiet acts of love are seen, or if your home, no matter how small, can hold something sacred, remember Obed. Remember the joy he brought. Remember the promise he carried. And rest, knowing that even the smallest life, born in peace and faith, can change the world. The fields of Bethlehem stretched wide beneath the open sky. The barley had turned gold, bending gently in the breeze like waves on a quiet sea. The wheat stood tall, heavy with grain, waiting to be gathered. The air was sweet with the scent of earth and growing things. It was the season of harvest, a time when all the labor of months before came to fruition. Harvest was more than just a time of work. It was a sacred rhythm, a time when the land gave back what had been sown, when the long days of tending and waiting found their reward, when hope was seen in sheaves of grain and baskets filled with fruit. In the story of Ruth and Naomi, the harvest is both a setting and a symbol. It is where Ruth steps forward to provide for Naomi. It is where Boaz shows kindness and protection. It is where love and loyalty are woven into every stalk of grain. But beyond the fields, harvest holds a deeper meaning. It reminds us of the seasons in our own lives. Seasons when we sow with care and faith. Seasons when we wait with patience and trust. Seasons when what we have planted begins to grow. And seasons when God gathers the fruit of His grace. Harvest teaches us that life moves in cycles, that there are times of planting and times of reaping, times of loss and times of gain, times of sorrow and times of joy. Naomi's journey was marked by this rhythm. She had experienced a time of famine, a time when the land was dry and empty and food was scarce. She had known loss and grief, but she also returned to Bethlehem during harvest, a season of abundance and blessing. Ruth's faithfulness was like a seed planted deep in the soil. Her choice to stay with Naomi, to leave her homeland, to work in the fields, these were acts of hope, trust, and love. And through those acts, God brought forth a harvest of kindness and redemption. Boaz's generosity was like the sun and rain that nurture a crop. His protection and provision allowed Ruth to gather grain without fear. His heart was open to blessing others, not just himself. And through him, the harvest became more than grain. It became a symbol of God's faithful care. In our own lives, we may find ourselves in seasons of planting or harvesting. We may sow kindness in quiet ways, hoping it will grow. We may reap blessings after long waiting. We may face times when the fields seem bare, or moments when the fruit is sweet and abundant. God's provision is sure. He knows the seasons we walk through. He cares for us like a farmer tending the land. And in every season, He invites us to trust Him, to be faithful in the small things, to rest in His timing. The harvest also reminds us of God's justice and mercy. In the law given to Israel, the edges of the fields were not to be fully harvested. Farmers were commanded to leave some grain behind for the poor and the foreigner. This law made space for those who had no land of their own. It was a reminder that provision is not just for the few, but for all. When Ruth gathered grain in Boaz's field, she was cared for by this law. Boaz's kindness was an earthly reflection of God's command to provide. It shows us that faithfulness includes caring for others. That love means leaving room for those in need. That generosity is a harvest of the heart. The fields of Bethlehem were more than soil and grain. They were a classroom of grace, a place where God's people learn to live in community, to share their blessings, to trust in His care, to carry one another through seasons of scarcity and plenty. As you rest tonight, dear listener, imagine the gentle rustle of grain, the warm sunlight on a golden field, the quiet steps of a woman gathering what she needs, the kindness of a man watching over her. Let this peaceful image remind you that life has seasons, and God is with you in every one. Whether you are sowing seeds or gathering fruit, whether you feel empty or full, whether you walk in grief or joy, God's harvest is coming. His grace is growing. His love is never ending. May this truth bring you rest. May it settle your heart. The story of Ruth and Naomi is a story of love that transcends blood and culture. It is a story of loyalty that shines quietly in the darkest times. It is a story of faithfulness that neither hardship nor loss could break. Naomi was a mother-in-law, not a mother. Ruth was a daughter-in-law, not a daughter. But their hearts were bound together with a love stronger than many family ties. They chose each other, again and again, in a world where that choice was not always easy. When Naomi first decided to return to Bethlehem, she urged her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab, to return to their families. She did not want them to come with her because she felt she had nothing to offer. She was broken by loss. She believed the future held no promise. Orpah listened and went back. But Ruth did not. Ruth's loyalty was quiet but firm. She spoke words that echoed through time. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. These words are not just a vow, they are a promise of unwavering faithfulness. Ruth chose to leave behind her homeland, her family, and the gods of her ancestors. She chose to walk a difficult path with Naomi, to share her pain and her hope. Loyalty like this is rare. It is built on love that chooses to stay, even when the way is hard. It is a gift given freely, without expecting anything in return. As Ruth followed Naomi to Bethlehem, she stepped into a land where she was an outsider. She faced the unknown with courage. She faced hard work and uncertainty with patience. She faced loss with faith. And Naomi, who once felt bitter and empty, found new strength in Ruth's devotion. Together they formed a bond of trust, a bond that held them through the quiet days and the bustling harvest. Through the loneliness of loss and the joy of restoration, their loyalty was practical as well as emotional. Ruth worked in the fields to gather food. Naomi guided her with wisdom and care. They shared everything they had. They looked out for one another, and through this steadfast love, they found healing. Their story invites us to think about the relationships in our own lives. Who stands beside us when we are tired? Who chooses to stay when others turn away? Who loves us not for what we can give, but for who we are? Loyalty is a choice. It is not always easy, but it is a quiet strength that carries us through storms. Ruth and Naomi teach us that love is more than feelings. It is commitment. It is sacrifice. It is a promise kept through every season. In a world that changes quickly, their story reminds us of the power of staying faithful, of being present, of loving without conditions, and this loyalty did not go unnoticed. God saw their hearts. God honored their faithfulness. He brought blessing through their steadfast love. Through Ruth's loyalty, Naomi was restored. Through their love, a new family was formed. Through their faithfulness, a lineage was continued. A lineage that would lead to kings and to the Messiah. So tonight, as you rest, think gently on the loyalty in your own life. Think on those who love you through the quiet and the difficult. Think on the ways you can choose faithfulness, even when it is not easy. Loyalty is a harvest of the heart. It grows slowly. It is nurtured with patience, and it bears fruit that lasts. May the story of Ruth and Naomi's love remind you of the beauty of commitment, of the peace that comes from choosing to stay, and of the hope that grows in faithful hearts. In the ancient laws given to Israel, the role of the kinsman redeemer was sacred. It was a responsibility born from love, family, and justice. The kinsman redeemer was the one who could step forward to protect the family's name, to restore what was lost, and to care for those in need. He was a figure of hope in times of hardship. Boaz was that man. He was a relative of Naomi's late husband, a close family member who had the right to act on behalf of Naomi and Ruth. When Ruth asked Boaz to redeem her, she was asking him to take on this role, to marry her and care for Naomi by preserving the family line. This was a serious commitment, one that involved courage, integrity, and love. Boaz did not take it lightly. He understood the weight of the law and the heart of God's commands. He honored Naomi's dignity. He respected Ruth's courage, and he acted with kindness. The story tells us that Boaz went to the town gate, the place where legal matters were settled and witnesses gathered. He spoke openly with the nearer relative, explaining the situation clearly. The other man had the first right to redeem the land and marry Ruth, but he chose not to. Boaz, with honesty and grace, then stepped forward. He declared his intention to redeem Naomi's land and take Ruth as his wife. This was not just a business transaction. It was an act of love, an act of faithfulness, an act of restoring what had been broken. Boaz's role as kinsman redeemer shows us God's heart, God's promise to care for his people, to redeem them from loss and pain, to bring new life from old sorrow. Through Boaz, God demonstrated that no one is forgotten, no family is abandoned, no hardship is beyond his reach. Boaz's actions created safety for Naomi and Ruth. He ensured they would have a home. He gave them dignity. He gave them hope. And in doing so, he became part of God's unfolding plan. The people of Bethlehem witnessed this act. They celebrated the redemption and the marriage. They blessed the couple, and they rejoiced at the restoration of Naomi's family. Boaz's role was more than a duty. It was a gift given with humility and generosity, a gift that mirrored the greater redemption God offers each of us. Just as Boaz redeemed Naomi and Ruth, God redeems us. He steps in to rescue us from loss. He restores what is broken. He brings us into his family. He gives us hope. And so, in the quiet fields and town gates of Bethlehem, the story of redemption was written, not in loud triumphs, not in grand gestures, but in gentle faithfulness, in honest words, in loving actions. Boaz reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength is kindness, that true leadership is serving others, and that redemption begins with a willing heart. As you rest tonight, dear listener, may the example of Boaz bring you peace. May it remind you that you are never alone, that God's redemption is near, and that love can restore even the deepest wounds. The story of Ruth and Naomi did not end with a marriage or a birth. It did not end with the gathering of grain or the blessing of a child. Their story lives on, carried in the hearts of those who hear it, told in whispers and songs, remembered in faith. Ruth and Naomi left a legacy of love, that crosses boundaries, a legacy of loyalty that withstands hardship, a legacy of hope that shines in the darkest moments. Their lives remind us that ordinary people can be part of God's extraordinary plan. Naomi, once bitter with loss, became a woman of renewed joy. Ruth, once a foreigner, became a mother in Israel's royal line. Together, they showed that faithfulness matters, that kindness matters, that God uses those who choose love. Their story is woven into the lineage of King David, a lineage that leads to the coming of the Messiah, Jesus, the one who brings ultimate redemption, ultimate love, ultimate hope. When we read about Ruth and Naomi, we see more than history. We see a pattern, a model for living, a call to trust, a reminder that God's grace reaches far. Their legacy teaches us about faith in action, about standing by those we love, about stepping into the unknown with courage. It teaches us about the power of quiet deeds, the power of everyday faithfulness, the power of a heart open to God's leading. As we reflect on their story tonight, let us carry their legacy in our own hearts. Let us be people who love deeply, who remain loyal, who hope steadfastly. The fields of Bethlehem are still there. The grain still grows. The story still whispers in the breeze. And it calls us to live with faith, love, and hope every day. May the legacy of Ruth and Naomi bring you peace tonight. May it inspire you to trust in God's gentle care. And may it remind you that your own story, no matter how small it seems, is part of something beautiful and eternal. The story of Ruth and Naomi takes place in a time far removed from our own. The lands they walked were ancient and full of history. The cities and fields carried the marks of generations who had come before. The customs and laws shaped every part of life, from how people worked to how they loved and cared for one another. To understand Ruth and Naomi's story more deeply, it helps to imagine the world they lived in. It was a world where family mattered deeply, where honor and loyalty were the ties that held communities together, where the land and the seasons were part of the rhythm of daily life. Naomi came from Bethlehem, a small town in the region of Judah. Bethlehem means house of bread, a fitting name for a place where grain grew and harvests fed many families. The town was modest, surrounded by hills and fields. The people were farmers and shepherds, living close to the earth and to each other. Life in Bethlehem was simple, but not always easy. Food was gathered from the land, and every season brought work. Planting, tending, harvesting, all these tasks required patience and care. Families depended on each other. Neighbors helped neighbors. The law of Moses, given long before, guided how they lived together. Women, like Naomi and Ruth, had important roles. They cared for homes, raised children, and often worked in the fields. Widows, however, faced special challenges. Without a husband, a woman could struggle to support herself. That is why the laws included provisions to protect widows and the poor. One such law was the practice of gleaning. After the main harvest, farmers were to leave some grain in their fields for the poor and the foreigner to gather. This was not just charity, but a command from God to ensure that no one was forgotten. When Ruth went to glean in Boaz's fields, she was part of this beautiful tradition of care. Naomi and Ruth's story also reflects the importance of family and kinship. In ancient Israel, family ties were sacred. The role of the kinsman redeemer, which Boaz fulfilled, was designed to protect the family's land and name. It ensured that widows and orphans had someone to care for them. This practice was a way of living out God's justice and mercy in everyday life. Moab, where Ruth was born, was a neighboring land with its own customs and gods. The Moabites were often seen as outsiders by the Israelites. Their history was complicated, marked by both conflict and connection. Ruth's choice to leave Moab for Bethlehem was not just a move across land, but a move across cultures and faiths. Her decision to adopt Naomi's people and God was a profound act of faith and love. It showed courage and a willingness to embrace the unknown. This made her story even more remarkable. The time of Ruth and Naomi was also marked by harvest seasons. The barley harvest came first, followed by the wheat harvest. These times were busy and important. Harvest was not only about gathering food, but about celebrating God's provision. It was a time of festivals, prayers, and community gatherings. Boaz's fields were part of this cycle of life and hope. His kindness to Ruth was a reflection of the values that guided their society. Protecting the vulnerable, honoring the law, and acting with generosity were signs of true faithfulness. Understanding these customs and the world around Ruth and Naomi helps us see their story in a new light. It is a story rooted in real life, in the soil and seasons of ancient Israel. It is a story of ordinary people living out extraordinary love and faith. As you rest tonight, imagine the soft breeze in the fields. Hear the rustle of grain. Picture the quiet town of Bethlehem with its narrow streets and small homes. Feel the steady rhythm of work and worship. And remember that God was present in all of it, guiding and caring for his people. May this gentle glimpse into their world deepen your peace and wonder. Faith is often described as trust in what we cannot see. It is a quiet strength that carries us through uncertain times. It is the gentle whisper that assures us we are not alone. In the story of Ruth and Naomi, faith in God is a steady thread woven through every moment of hardship and hope. Naomi had known deep sorrow. She had lost her husband and her 2 sons. She returned to Bethlehem feeling empty and bitter, calling herself Mara, which means bitter, because she believed God had dealt harshly with her. Yet even in her pain, Naomi's faith was not lost. It was hidden beneath sorrow, but it remained. Ruth, a Moabite woman, showed remarkable faith by choosing to follow Naomi and her God. When she declared, "Your people will be my people, and your God my God," she made a commitment that changed her life forever. This was not simply joining a new family, but embracing a new faith, a new way of life grounded in the one true God. Their journey together was a living example of faith in action. It was not marked by grand miracles or dramatic signs, but by daily choices to trust God's care. Ruth's decision to glean in Boaz's fields showed her reliance on God's provision. Boaz's kindness reflected God's protection. Throughout their story, God's presence is quiet but powerful. He does not force their path, but gently guides them. He opens doors for Ruth and Naomi, provides safety and sustenance, and blesses their faithfulness. Faith in God gave Naomi hope to face each new day. It gave Ruth courage to step into a new land and culture. It gave Boaz a heart ready to act with justice and mercy. This faith was shared and passed on through generations. The child born to Ruth and Boaz, Obed, carried this legacy. Through Obed came Jesse, and through Jesse came David, the great king who trusted in God's heart. And through David's line came Jesus, the Messiah, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise. The story reminds us that faith is often quiet. It is found in the simple acts of love, loyalty, and obedience. It is present when we choose to stay when leaving would be easier. It grows in the fields where we gather what we need, trusting God's timing. As you rest tonight, think softly about the faith in your own life, the times when you have trusted without seeing, the moments when God's presence was felt in a gentle way. Faith is a gift. It is a light in the darkness. It is a foundation that will never fail. May the story of Ruth and Naomi's faith bring you comfort and peace. The Harvest Festival was a time of joy and thanksgiving in ancient Israel. It marked the end of the long season of planting and growing. The fields that had once been bare now burst with golden grain, ripe and ready to be gathered. The people of Bethlehem and all the surrounding villages prepared for this special season with hearts full of gratitude. The Harvest Festival was not only a time to gather food, but also a time to remember God's faithfulness and provision throughout the year. It was a celebration of life, hope, and community. In the story of Ruth and Naomi, the Harvest Festival carried deep meaning. For Naomi, it was a time when she could finally feel hope again. After years of loss and sorrow, the season of gathering reminded her that life still carried promise. For Ruth, the festival was a sign of new beginnings and a welcome into a new family and faith. It was a time when she could share in the joys of Israel and be embraced by its people. The festival was often celebrated with feasting, singing, and dancing. The air would fill with the sweet aroma of freshly baked bread, roasted grain, and ripe fruit. The people would come together in the town square or the fields, sharing food and stories. It was a time to honor the harvest and give thanks to God for his blessings. The elders would speak of God's goodness, reminding everyone that the harvest was a gift from him. In those days, the harvest was hard work, but also a sacred duty. Men and women would labor side by side, cutting the grain with sickles, binding it into sheaves, and carrying it to storage places. The act of harvesting was filled with care and reverence. Each stalk of grain was precious because it meant sustenance and survival. To gather the harvest well was to honor God's provision. During the festival, there was also a special law that showed God's heart for justice and mercy. Farmers were commanded not to reap the edges of their fields completely. They were to leave some grain behind for the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners like Ruth. This law was a beautiful reminder that everyone belonged to the community and that no one should be forgotten or left hungry. Ruth's gleaning in Boaz's field was a living example of this law in action. The festival brought the people closer together. It was a time to celebrate the fruits of their labor and the blessings of their God. It was a time to remember that even after hardship and loss, new life could grow. The Harvest Festival was a season of hope. Naomi and Ruth experienced this hope in the kindness of Boaz and in the community's acceptance of Ruth. As they gathered grain and prepared for the festival, they felt the warmth of belonging. The people's smiles and blessings helped heal Naomi's heart. The laughter and joy of the festival lifted Ruth's spirit. The Harvest Festival was not only about food, but also about faith. It was a time to remember God's promises and to trust in His continued care. The people would offer sacrifices and prayers, thanking God for His goodness. They would sing songs that celebrated His power and mercy. Through all the festivities, the Harvest Festival pointed to God as the true provider. For Ruth and Naomi, the festival was a symbol of God's faithfulness. It showed that even after seasons of drought and famine, God's blessing would come. It reminded them that God's timing was perfect. It revealed that God's love was patient and enduring. As you imagine this gentle scene of the Harvest Festival, picture the golden fields glowing in the soft sunlight. Hear the quiet murmur of voices sharing stories and laughter. Feel the warm breeze carrying the scent of fresh grain and sweet fruit. See the faces of neighbors and friends gathered in joy and gratitude. Let this peaceful image fill your heart with comfort. Let the rhythm of the festival remind you that life moves in seasons, that even after hardship there is celebration, that God's provision is sure. May the story of the Harvest Festival in Ruth and Naomi's time bring you calm and hope as you rest. May it remind you that God's blessings come in quiet, beautiful ways. And may it invite you to trust in His loving care, no matter what season you are in. Kindness can be quiet. It does not always arrive with loud words or grand gestures. Often, it comes in a gentle act, a soft word, or a small decision that changes everything. In the story of Ruth and Naomi, Boaz is a man who shows kindness not for attention or praise, but because it is the right and godly thing to do. His care for Ruth becomes one of the most beautiful examples of quiet generosity in all of Scripture. When Boaz first saw Ruth gleaning in his field, he noticed her right away. She was new to Bethlehem. She was young. She was gathering the leftover grain, working hard under the sun. But more than that, Boaz had heard about her. He knew what she had done for Naomi. He knew she had left her homeland and family to care for her mother-in-law. He knew she had chosen to live among a people she did not know before. And Boaz was moved by her loyalty and bravery. But he did not simply admire her from afar. He acted. He spoke to her kindly. He made sure she was safe in his field. He told his workers not to rebuke her or make her feel unwelcome. He invited her to drink from the water jars meant for his own laborers. He even instructed his workers to leave behind extra stalks for her to pick up. These were not grand or costly things. They were everyday acts of care. Yet each one showed that Boaz understood what it meant to see someone who might be overlooked. He noticed Ruth's needs, and he answered them with grace. When Ruth asked Boaz why he was being so kind to her, he answered with gentleness. He told her he had seen her faithfulness to Naomi. He spoke blessing over her. He said, May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." These words held both kindness and truth. Boaz was not just being generous out of duty. He saw in Ruth a kindred spirit, someone who trusted in God's protection and walked with courage. And so he honored her not only with grain and safety, but with blessing and respect. Boaz's generosity reminds us of the character of God. God sees us when we are low. He notices when we feel unseen. He offers protection, comfort, and provision. God is the one under whose wings we find refuge, just as Boaz said. In every quiet kindness of Boaz, we glimpse the heart of our Creator. And in Ruth's humility and gratitude, we see a heart that receives kindness with grace. When Ruth returned home to Naomi after gleaning, her arms full of grain, Naomi was amazed. She asked where Ruth had worked. Ruth told her all about Boaz and his kindness. Naomi's face must have softened with wonder. The same woman who once called herself bitter now spoke words of praise. She said, "The Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." Naomi recognized something greater happening. She saw that Boaz's kindness was part of God's larger plan. She began to hope again. That is what kindness can do. It revives hope. It mends broken hearts. It whispers, "You are not forgotten." Boaz was not obligated to help Ruth in the way he did. He chose to be generous. He chose to reflect God's compassion, and his choice rippled outward, bringing life to Ruth and Naomi. When we look at our own lives, we may find ourselves in the place of Ruth receiving kindness we did not expect. Or we may be like Boaz, given the opportunity to extend compassion to someone in need. Either way, we are part of the same story. The story of God's love working through people. The story of care passed from hand to hand. The story of redemption built through simple, loving acts. Kindness can seem small, but it is never wasted. A kind word can lift a weary heart. A kind gesture can change a life. A kind thought can plant peace in someone's soul. As you rest tonight, think softly about the kindness in your own life, the kindness you have received, the kindness you have offered. Each one is like a seed planted in the field of God's grace, and in time, kindness grows. It blossoms into something beautiful, something eternal. Let the story of Boaz's gentle generosity remind you that the heart of God is full of mercy and goodness, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, is a light shining in the world. Ruth was not born into the land of Israel. She was a Moabite woman, from a nation often seen as an outsider by the people of God. Yet from the very beginning of her story, Ruth stands out not by pride or demand, but by her deep humility. Humility is not about lowering ourselves in shame. It is about standing in truth and walking with grace. It is the ability to accept what is before us without complaint or bitterness. It is choosing gentleness in a world that often rewards pride. Ruth's humility appeared in every choice she made. When her husband died and Naomi urged her to stay in Moab, Ruth could have stayed behind, where she was known and supported. Instead, she chose to follow Naomi, not as an equal, but as a servant and companion. She gave up her home, her language, her culture, and her gods. She quietly took Naomi's hand and stepped forward into the unknown. Her words remain among the most beautiful in all of Scripture. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. These are not the words of someone seeking gain or comfort. They are the words of someone who has given her whole heart in love. Her humility was not submission to fate, but surrender to love and trust. When Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, she did not seek attention. She did not tell others of her loss or expect pity. Instead, she asked Naomi for permission to glean in the fields, as the poor and foreigner were allowed to do under the law. She rose early in the morning. She walked to the fields. She bent her back and worked with her hands. She gathered the stalks left behind by the harvesters, one by one, under the Sunday. When Boaz noticed her and approached her with kindness, Ruth's response was not pride or assumption. She bowed before him and said, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me a foreigner?" Her words were full of gratitude. She did not believe she deserved special attention. She was surprised by kindness, and in that surprise we see the purity of her heart. Boaz, too, was moved by her humility. He told her that he had heard all she had done for Naomi, that she had come to a people she did not know, and had shown loyalty and care. Boaz did not see her as a foreigner. He saw her as a woman of noble character. Her humility became her honor. Later, when Naomi told Ruth to go to Boaz at the threshing floor, Ruth obeyed with quiet dignity. She did not approach Boaz with demands. She waited until he had finished eating and drinking and had gone to sleep. Then she uncovered his feet and lay down, a sign of seeking protection and refuge. When Boaz awoke and asked who was there, Ruth answered with gentleness. She said, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." These were not words of bold insistence. They were words of respectful petition. She placed herself under his care, trusting in his goodness and in God's provision. Boaz, once again, was moved by her heart. He praised her kindness and her humility, and he acted with honor and care. Throughout all these moments, Ruth never pushed herself forward. She never demanded recognition. She never assumed that anyone owed her anything. And yet, God saw her. God, who lifts the humble and fills the empty with good things, honored Ruth's quiet spirit. He brought her into a place of blessing, not because she reached for it, but because she waited with faith. God honors those who walk humbly with him. The story of Ruth is a beautiful reminder that humility is never wasted. In Ruth's story, humility looks like waking early and working hard without complaint. It looks like accepting kindness with wonder. It looks like choosing another's well-being above your own. It looks like trusting God with the path ahead, even when you do not know where it will lead. As you rest tonight, dear listener, may Ruth's humility bring peace to your heart. You do not have to be loud to be strong. You do not have to be seen by many to be seen by God. Your quiet love, your faithful service, your gentle spirit, they are treasures in God's eyes. And just as Ruth was lifted from the fields of gleaning to the home of Boaz, just as her name was remembered among kings and prophets, so too does God see your quiet faith. He holds your story in his hands, and he will bless the humble with rest, with hope, and with love. When Naomi returned to Bethlehem, the women of the town saw her and remembered her name. They said, "Can this be Naomi?" But Naomi answered them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Her words were heavy. Her heart had grown tired. She believed that she had returned empty. The name Naomi means pleasant. The name Mara means bitter. In those first days back in Bethlehem, Naomi could not see beyond her grief. She had lost her husband. She had lost both of her sons. She had left Bethlehem full and returned with only her daughter-in-law, a foreign woman with no promise of a future. Naomi believed that God had turned against her, though she still honored him by name. She did not curse God. She did not run from him. She simply believed her suffering was too great to carry joy again. But God had not forgotten Naomi. Even in her sorrow, he was at work. Even in her silence, he was drawing her toward healing. He sent Ruth into her life, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a companion, a support, a reminder of what faithfulness looked like. Ruth followed Naomi, not only to a new land, but through the long valley of grief. Ruth did not try to fix Naomi's sorrow with words. She simply stayed. Day after day, Ruth's presence became a quiet comfort. When Naomi sat in silence, Ruth was beside her. When Naomi had no strength, Ruth went out to gather food. When Naomi felt abandoned, Ruth returned home each evening with grain in her arms and love in her heart. It was this daily faithfulness that slowly began to soften the edges of Naomi's sorrow. It was this steady love that made space for God's healing. When Ruth returned home one evening with a generous amount of barley and news of Boaz's kindness, Naomi's voice changed. For the first time in a long while, she said, "The Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." These words were more than a blessing. They were a turning point. Naomi, who once believed she had been forgotten, began to see signs of God's care again. The bitterness began to ease. Her hands, once empty, now held grain. Her heart, once closed, now opened to the hope of redemption. Naomi's transformation was not sudden. It happened gently, like morning light creeping over the hills of Bethlehem. It happened through love, through Ruth's patient companionship, through Boaz's honorable care, and through God's unseen hand guiding every step. As the harvest continued, Naomi began to guide Ruth with wisdom. She advised her gently, helping her understand the customs of the land. When it was time for Ruth to approach Boaz on the threshing floor, Naomi gave her the instruction. She said, "Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor." These were not the words of a woman still drowning in grief. These were the words of someone who believed in possibility again. Naomi had begun to hope. And hope is a quiet light. It returns not with fire, but with warmth. When Boaz agreed to take Ruth as his wife and redeem Naomi's family, Naomi's joy blossomed again. Her hands had once been empty, but now they would cradle a grandchild. Her heart had once been bitter, but now it would beat with joy. And when the child was born, it was Naomi the women of the town gathered around. They said, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age." Then Naomi took the child in her arms. She cared for him as her own. The women said, "Naomi has a son," and they named the child Obed. He would become the father of Jesse, the grandfather of David, the king of Israel. Naomi's journey had come full circle. She had returned to Bethlehem empty, but now her lap was full. Her sorrow had not been forgotten, but it had been healed. Her bitterness had not been erased, but it had been softened. She had not been abandoned. God had stayed close. He had walked with her through every silent night. He had spoken comfort through Ruth. He had shown kindness through Boaz. He had written her story into his great plan. As you rest now, dear listener, think gently on Naomi's journey. Perhaps you too have known sorrow. Perhaps you have walked through loss or felt forgotten. Let Naomi's story remind you that God does not leave us in our pain. He stays, He waits, He works, and in time He restores what was broken. He gives comfort to the weary. He brings joy to the bitter heart, and He fills empty arms with new life. Naomi's transformation is not only a story of healing, it is a promise that even in the hardest seasons there is hope, that even after long silence there is song, that love, when faithful, can carry us all the way home. The story of Ruth is a story for all people, but it holds something especially powerful for women. In every season of life, Ruth shows what it means to walk in dignity, to act with quiet strength, and to choose love even when it is difficult. Her story lives beyond the barley fields of Bethlehem. It echoes through time, across cultures, and into hearts that are still learning what it means to live with courage and trust. Ruth was not a queen or a prophet. She held no high position. She did not come from wealth or fame, and yet her name is remembered with honor. Her choices, gentle, faithful, and brave, changed history. She reminds us that dignity is not about being seen by the world. It is about knowing who you are, even in silence. When Ruth followed Naomi to Bethlehem, she did not do so with a plan to be praised. She did not imagine that her name would be recorded in Scripture. She simply loved. She loved Naomi enough to leave everything behind. She loved with her feet and her hands, with her service and her sacrifice. In doing so, Ruth teaches us what it means to be loyal. She did not walk away when it became hard. She did not give up when life turned painful. Her love remained steady, even when the road was long and unfamiliar. Women today still face uncertain paths, still carry the weight of family, care, and change, still stand at the edge of the unknown, wondering where the next step will lead. And in Ruth, we see that it is possible to walk that path with beauty and grace. We see that even in loss, we can choose love. Even in fear, we can choose faith. Even when we feel invisible, God sees us. Ruth was not powerful in the way the world defines power. She was powerful in love. She was powerful in choice. She was powerful in humility. And this kind of power never fades. When she arrived in Bethlehem, Ruth did not demand attention. She did not expect help. She simply asked for permission to glean. She worked with her hands. She bent low in the fields. She labored among strangers. And she did it all with a heart that trusted in something greater than herself. Her dignity did not come from what others thought of her. It came from her character. It came from her faith. It came from the quiet strength that God had placed within her. Many women have read Ruth's story and felt a connection, whether they are mothers or daughters, widows or wives, caretakers or seekers. Ruth's life shows that God honors women who walk faithfully. He sees those who serve in quiet ways. He lifts up those who give without recognition. He cherishes the ones who love without limit. Ruth's journey also reminds us that womanhood is not one thing. It is many things. It is the tenderness of caring for someone who is hurting. It is the firmness of working long hours for survival. It is the courage to speak with honesty and the grace to wait with patience. It is knowing when to stay and when to act. Ruth showed all of these. She stayed with Naomi. She acted in faith. She waited for Boaz. She trusted in God. And in all of this, she remained herself true, grounded, and open-hearted. Her story tells us that God does not forget women who feel overlooked. He did not forget Ruth when she walked behind the harvesters. He did not forget her when she lay at Boaz's feet. He did not forget her when she bore a child whose name would be remembered forever. God saw her. God blessed her. God placed her in the line of kings and the story of the Messiah. And He does not forget you either. If you are a woman walking through change, if you are holding on to love through sorrow, if you are working in unseen ways to care for others, let Ruth remind you that your life matters deeply to God. He sees every sacrifice. He honors every act of love. He holds your story in His hand, and He can turn even the most painful path into a journey of joy. Ruth's legacy is not just that she was a wife or a mother. It is that she was faithful. It is that she loved well. It is that she walked with dignity and trusted in a God she barely knew. And that trust was enough. Her life became part of a greater story, and so can yours. As you close your eyes tonight, breathe gently. Rest in the peace that you do not walk alone. Whether you are in a season of harvest or a season of waiting, God is near. His kindness surrounds you, and your faith, like Ruth's, is precious in His sight. You are part of something eternal, something holy, and your story, like Ruth's, is known and loved by the one who writes every life with purpose. In every generation, we look for examples of good leadership. We search for people who guide not with force but with compassion, who listen more than they speak, who protect rather than control. In the story of Ruth and Naomi, Boaz stands quietly as one of these rare and shining figures. He is not loud. He is not proud. But he is strong. He is steady. He is a man of honor. Boaz was a landowner, a man of wealth, and a leader in the town of Bethlehem. He was respected by others. Yet when he walked through his fields, he greeted his workers with a blessing. He said, "The Lord be with you," and they answered him with kindness in return. That small exchange tells us much. It shows that he did not rule over people with fear. He led with peace. When he first saw Ruth gleaning among the leftover stalks, he did not ignore her. He asked gently, "Who does that young woman belong to?" Not to claim her, not to judge her, but to understand. And when he learned that she was the young woman who had come back from Moab with Naomi, the one who had shown such love and loyalty, his heart was moved. He approached her with kindness. He told her to stay in his field, to follow along behind the servant girls, to drink from the water jars whenever she grew thirsty. He gave her safety in a land where she had no family. He gave her dignity in a place where she could have been rejected. He gave her space to work, to gather, and to rest. Boaz did not treat Ruth as less because she was a foreigner. He saw her heart. He saw her faithfulness, and he honored it. When Ruth asked why he was being so kind, he answered with care. He said, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." And then he spoke a blessing. "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz saw that Ruth had placed her trust in God, and he was ready to be part of God's answer. Later, when Ruth came to him at the threshing floor and asked him to cover her with the corner of his garment, Boaz once again responded with tenderness. He did not take advantage. He did not shame her. He praised her kindness once more. He said, "You have shown even greater kindness now than before, because you have not run after the younger men." Boaz then promised to take care of the matter honorably. He reminded Ruth that while he was a close relative, there was another man who had a prior claim. Boaz could have ignored that fact. He could have acted on impulse, but he did not. He followed the proper path. He upheld the law with care and respect. He was a man of integrity. At the city gate, before the elders and townspeople, Boaz made his intentions known. He spoke clearly. He gave others the chance to speak. And when the other relative declined, Boaz said, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite as my wife." He said it not with pride, but with reverence. He honored Ruth. He honored Naomi. He honored the law. And all the people and the elders said, "We are witnesses." They blessed Boaz and Ruth. They prayed that their house would be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. This blessing shows that the people saw Boaz's heart. They trusted his character. They respected his leadership. Boaz teaches us that true strength does not need to shout. It listens. It protects. It does what is right even when no one is watching. His actions reflect the heart of God. God too sees the forgotten. He gathers the outsider. He shelters the weary under the shadow of his wings. Boaz was not a perfect man, but he walked closely with the Lord. He lived the law not just in rule, but in spirit. He treated others with compassion, especially those who had little, and for that, God blessed him. His union with Ruth brought joy not only to themselves but to Naomi and to all of Bethlehem. Together they had a son named Obed, and from Obed came Jesse, and from Jesse came David, and from the line of David many generations later came Jesus. Boaz's quiet life became part of God's greatest story, not because he sought power, but because he chose kindness. As you rest tonight, let the example of Boaz warm your heart. If you are in a place of influence, no matter how small, know that your kindness matters. If you lead a family, a workplace, a classroom, or even one soul beside you, remember that gentleness is not weakness. To honor others is strength. To protect the vulnerable is greatness. To speak with blessing and act with care is to walk in the way of Boaz. And in doing so, we reflect the love of the one who leads us all. When we hear the word Redeemer in the story of Ruth, it might sound gentle and poetic, but in ancient Israel, it carried deep meaning. A redeemer was someone who stepped in to rescue, to protect, to restore what had been lost. A redeemer was not only a kind person, he had a legal role. He was someone from the family who would come close and carry the burden of another out of love, not obligation. In Ruth's story, Boaz becomes that person. He sees her. He sees Naomi. And he says with his actions, I will not let your name fade. I will not let your land be lost. I will take you in. I will make you mine. This idea of redemption is beautiful, but it is also holy, because this moment does more than give Ruth and Naomi a future. It shows us a quiet picture of something far beyond Bethlehem's barley fields. It gently reveals the coming of another Redeemer, one who would not only rescue a family, but the entire world. When Ruth and Boaz were joined in marriage, and Obed was born, the women of Bethlehem rejoiced. They said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. The word they used was not just about Boaz. It was about what God had done through him. Naomi had returned empty, but now her lap was full. She had lost a family, but now she held a child. And through that child, a new promise was born. Obed grew up to become the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of David. And from the line of David came Jesus. It all began in a quiet field, with a widow who chose to stay, with a woman who gleaned, with a man who gave generously, and with a God who watched over every moment. The story of Ruth is like a small stream that flows gently toward a river. It begins in sorrow. It moves through kindness. It carries hope. And then it reaches the ocean of God's plan, a Redeemer who would one day carry every sorrow and offer a new name to everyone who calls on him. Jesus is the true Redeemer. He does not stand far away. He comes close. He sees our pain. He knows our need. And he says with his life, I will carry your burden. I will restore your name. I will make you mine. Just as Boaz did not hesitate to act for Ruth and Naomi, Jesus does not hesitate to come for us. He does not wait until we are strong. He meets us in weakness. He meets us in grief. He meets us in the ordinary places of our lives, and he says, "You are not forgotten. You are not too far. You are not too late." In Ruth's story, we see the shape of salvation forming quietly, not in loud declarations, but in harvests, in footsteps, in whispered blessings, in the touch of a newborn baby placed in Naomi's arms. The Redeemer would come into the world in just the same way, through birth, through a quiet town, through the line of Ruth, through the house of David. God writes his promises into the lives of those who trust him. He honors the gentle, he lifts up the humble, and he weaves even the smallest acts into something eternal. When Ruth chose to stay with Naomi, she did not know what the future held, but God did. When Boaz showed kindness, he did not know his name would be remembered forever, but God did. When Naomi held Obed and her heart was healed, she did not know that the Savior of the world would come from her family, but God did. God always knows. He sees the end from the beginning, and in every story he writes, there is redemption, there is love, there is hope that cannot be shaken. As you rest tonight, think softly about this. You are not walking alone. You are not without a Redeemer. Whatever part of your story feels unfinished or broken, God is still writing. Whatever has been lost, he can restore. Whatever feels empty, he can fill. You do not need to strive. You do not need to force. Just stay close to him. He is gentle. He is faithful, and he redeems everything in his time. The Redeemer who came through Ruth's family still walks among us now. He sees your heart. He calls you by name, and he welcomes you with peace. As our time together comes to a close, let us pause to reflect softly on the journey of Ruth and Naomi, their love, their loyalty, and the harvest of hope that grew from their faith. Their story is not just ancient history. It is a living reminder that even in sorrow there is kindness. Even in uncertainty there is trust. Even in waiting there is purpose. May you carry these truths quietly within you. May love guide your steps as Ruth's did. A love that chooses to stay, to care, and to be faithful even when the path is hard. May loyalty be the foundation of your relationships, like the bond between Naomi and Ruth, built on trust and devotion beyond words. May hope shine gently in your heart, like the soft light of the barley fields under Bethlehem's sky, promising that new life always follows the seasons of waiting. As you rest now, let God's peace fill your soul. May you feel his presence surrounding you like a warm embrace. May his gentle hand guide you through every moment, through every challenge and joy. Know that you are held by the same love that held Naomi when she was weary, by the same grace that blessed Ruth's faithfulness, and by the same strength that moved Boaz to kindness. Carry this story with you as a quiet light, a light that shines in the darkest times, a light that whispers, "You are seen, you are loved, you are never alone." Sleep now in that peace. Breathe softly. Let your heart be calm. Let your spirit rest. And when morning comes, may you awaken with a renewed sense of hope and a gentle courage to walk your own path of love and faithfulness. Good night, dear friend.